My name is Lori Conlin. I am the director of two different offices in the Office of Intramural Training and Education, both the director of the Postdoc Office and the director of the Career Services Center. I am really excited to do this talk with you. This post-pandemic hiring, this crystal ball type of thing, was started last year when I talked to professionals in the career development field a little bit about what we thought was happening. It was really stressful last summer. None of us knew exactly what was happening. And it's been a full year since the pandemic has kind of happened. And so we have a lot more information and a lot more data about what's going on and where we see the future going. So I'm really excited to give you this talk. I've really thought a lot about post-pandemic hiring and what's going to happen as things go back to normal, whatever normal is. So I'm excited that you guys could come. I'm excited that you're participating today. We do really appreciate your flexibility with some of the Zoom links today and throughout the rest of the week, and that you're actually hanging out with us for a little bit. So our game plan today is that we're going to talk a little bit about the current state of the job market based on the different sectors that we typically talk about in for the biomedical workforce. We're also going to talk a little bit about some of our predictions about where this will go in 2021. So, this is crystal ball. I'm not going to guarantee that all of these predictions are going to come true, but this is really what we think, what we've seen from past job markets, and really what professionals in the field are seeing from their own institutions. The next thing we're going to do is give you some tips to make sure that you're ready to be a really good and competitive candidate. Okay, so making sure that you're a good and competitive candidate using some of the information from the speakers that we have. So again, we're going to talk about it from our 4 different sectors that we typically talk about for biomedical research folks: nonprofits, government, industry, and academics. And we're going to go in that order. And we got our information from a lot of different sources. One of the coolest things we did is we had over 300 speakers that came over the past week for our NIH Career Symposium this week. So we asked all of them a couple of questions about hiring and where they saw hiring. Remember, they're not the expert, they're not at the high level of, at the Department of Labor, for example, but from their own institutions, what are they seeing? What are they seeing happening? What did they see happen over the past year? And we have a really good set of data from that. Additionally, we gave them an open-ended box. And in that open-ended box, a lot of them gave us some really good advice for you. So we're going to kind of collate and give you some of those quotes that they gave us, and then talk about how you can make an action plan based on what those speakers say. Additionally, we looked at a lot of national data sources for what's happening around hiring. People who have gone off and done surveys, looked at the number of job ads that are open, the number of hiring that has been frozen. So we looked at the American Association of Medical Colleges, which is the AAMC. We looked at the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is an amazing resource that has done a lot of research around what's happening in the field. Science and Nature both have done some good stuff. And GeneCoda is a national consulting firm that looks at industry hiring and lots of other places. I could not have done this talk without the amazing help of Teresa Lee, an OITE postdoc who came in early April and kind of helped me gather all this data. So kudos to Teresa Lee for helping me out. So one of the first questions we asked we surveyed our NIH Career Symposium speakers with was, did your organization decrease hiring over the past hiring cycle due to the pandemic? So, what happened in 2020 basically is the question that we asked them. And so we've again posted this out based on sectors. So academics, government, oh, sorry, the train is behind me, industry, and additional careers. Okay, so we asked each one of these different organizations what happened during the pandemic. Most of our government staffers who came in and talked, and we had a lot of people from both NIH, the FDA, NASA, the Department of Defense. So we had people from all across the US government. They said, we didn't change anything, right? So the orange is like, we're perfectly fine. So the government didn't really change hiring over the past year, which is also really interesting because as an administration changes, we often have some different labor like hiring freezes and things like that. And that did not happen this year. So government continued to hire very strongly throughout the full pandemic. Our speakers also said for industry, yes, that's the same. Remember, orange means, we didn't change a thing. So industry kept hiring throughout the entire pandemic and the additional careers. So that's stuff like science policy, nonprofits, business, right? All these other types of things. They didn't change either. I think the one that most of you know is this one, where our academic partners often said that they did change and decrease their hiring over the past year due to the pandemic. And that's going to come out time and time again as we talk through the thing, is that academics were hit more than any of the other sector. But we're really hoping that going forward, that things are going to be more awesome, even in academics. The second question we asked all of our speakers was, what do you think will change in your organization after the pandemic, right? So this is change. So if somebody says nothing's going to change, it may mean they were perfectly fine, right? So for government, the majority of our speakers who are in government organizations said nothing is going to change, this gray bar here. Well, that's not that big of a surprise since they didn't decrease their hiring whatsoever. Industry also didn't decrease their hiring very much, right? Remember that from the last slide. So they say, well, we're not going to change either because we were hiring all the time. But I think the interesting part about this part of the graph is that industry also said they're going to increase. So we are definitely seeing that our industry partners are hiring more and continuing to hire more even after the pandemic ends. The same thing is with additional careers, right? The hiring is high, the hiring is going to continue to go. I think the most positive news out of this particular slide, though, is over here in academics, okay? We're seeing the greatest increase of thinking that hiring is going to increase after the pandemic for our academic partners. And so this makes us feel really good to see that our academic friends are starting to open up their job searches even more and more after the pandemic. And we're going to get more into that and talk about more data around that as we go through the talk. Okay, so the upshot is government, industry, and additional careers didn't really decrease their hiring because of the pandemic. And in fact, most of them look they're going to even increase their hiring more as we move into 2021. Our academic partners were hit a little bit more by hiring trends during the pandemic, but they are seeing an increase in hiring as we move through 2021. Okay, so I thought I'd give you a little bit of information about why each one of the different sectors were influenced and how they were influenced by the how they were influenced by the downturn. So a little bit of the why behind this, right? Okay, so nonprofits, some of them did take a pause or maybe a slight downturn in hiring as they kind of regrouped around what was happening. And the reason that is I came from a nonprofit. My first job after my postdoc was a nonprofit. It really depends on where the money is coming from. Is the money coming from memberships, which means you have a very stable dollar amount coming in? Is it coming from events? Most of our national meetings that we go to, think about the American Association of Immunology or AACR or the National Postdoc Association, whatever it is, their annual meetings make money to keep the organization going for the next year. So as all of these events have been canceled because of the pandemic, it really hurt the bottom line of many nonprofits, which means they didn't have as much money to hire people. Additionally, because of this was true in the very beginning of the pandemic and has really settled out over the past year, initially philanthropy and investments were really decreased as people didn't really know where the economy was going. So as philanthropy investments have started to increase because it's a little bit more, the economy is more stable, nonprofits are getting more money. but nonprofits, everybody, in fact, moved to virtual interviews and virtual onboarding. So folks are still at home. But anytime you see quotes here, this means it's something that one of the speakers told us as we go through. One of the speakers told us, who works for nonprofits, is that the current staff wears so many hats. And so because some of the hiring was decreased and maybe people had left, they're doing more things. And trust me, I know that's true in the OITE, and all the OITE staff here can agree to that. We're wearing more hats, we're doing more things, and that's not tenable in the long term. We're not able to keep that pace up, and we're not being able to take on extra responsibilities. We've got, our plates are full. And so that means that they're predicting to increase hiring in nonprofits because of that particular information. Now, in government and industry, you all saw already there was strong hiring all the way through. We did virtual interviews, virtual onboarding. I know a couple of our speakers who were here for the Career Symposium actually transitioned from a postdoc into the government during the pandemic fully virtually, and perfectly went fine. One of my favorite speakers who came to Career Symposium this year, she said, biotech is hiring like crazy. And so we definitely didn't see that. We have data on that too. This comes from Gene Coda, again, a national consulting firm that looks at hiring trends. This is life sector job postings by category. So red is basically R&D, right? So R&D, research and development, and research, testing, and medical labs. The yellow in this particular case is manufacturing. So once the R&D is done, the manufacturing happens. And then the blue here is medical devices and equipment. And the thing that you see here is that during the pandemic, right? So this is the first quarter. So this is right, obviously, before the pandemic hit in January of 2020. Hiring was continuing to go up and kind of settling at about 500,000 jobs posted per year. There was a quick decrease in the second quarter of 2020, which isn't a big surprise as everyone kind of regrouped and tried to figure out what was next. But what you're seeing is in the first quarter here of 2021, job postings are increasing, which goes towards our original conversation when we asked our speakers, and the speakers from industry said, oh, we're going to increase our hiring. So we're seeing an increase in our hiring in our industry sectors, exactly as we would have expected. And this is from more national data. One of the things I definitely have seen in all of the data that we have been looking at is that the R&D and the manufacturing are growing at a faster rate than medical devices and medical equipment. That particular sector of life science industry took a little bit more of a hit during the pandemic than did the other two, but we are definitely seeing an increase across the board in job postings specific in industry. So I'm really excited to see this. I hope you are too. It means there's definitely postings that are out there. So just kind of wrapping up this industry hiring, this is a link to some data from that you guys can go to, look to later. We will send you the slides after the talk. And so you'll have all these links later. Hirings in life sciences have come back to pre-pandemic levels. Companies are definitely, though, looking for more specific talent, looking for how they're going to navigate post-COVID workplaces. They're looking for folks with strong communication skills and ease with technology. And trust me, after figuring out your Zoom link today, you all have an ease with technology and a flexible and adaptable approach to their work. We are going to come back to this list because this list is really how you can set yourself up to be a competitive candidate. And I have to say for this list, this is a phenomenal list, but it is not specific to industry. This is a list that is good for every single sector that is out there. And so to become a competitive candidate, we need to focus on all parts of this list. All right, so what you're really here for, right? What's happening in academics and why has it happened? It is definitely more uncertain in academic sectors about what's happening around the hiring trends. The reason why is this. The first is tuition dollars are unknown. We're not really sure what the undergraduates, how many undergraduates are going to be around. One of the speakers from a primarily undergraduate institution said in the survey is that in the 2020-21, so the academic cycle we're currently in, the undergraduate population decreased by 5%. They're predicting that the next academic cycle that it's going to decrease again by 5% as undergrads are waiting to see what's happening and don't necessarily want to go to school fully virtually. So some of them are going back. All those that decrease of 5 to 10% is a less money, less tuition dollars. And especially at places like primarily undergraduate institutions who run on tuition dollars instead of grant dollars, that definitely hurts the ability for them to hire new faculty because there's just less money. In more larger universities, it's the same thing. And so a lot of those unknown tuition dollars made them just freeze their hiring just for a bit as they kind of figured out what was happening. If you're looking at state schools, something like a Michigan State University or a University of Michigan or something like that, in the very beginning, no one was sure what was going to happen with state tax revenue. People weren't spending as much money. There wasn't as much of employment taxes, et cetera, things like that. So they weren't 100% sure what was going to happen with state revenue, and they thought it might decrease. Interestingly, as the economy kind of rebounded, this ended up not being as big a deal in some states as it was in other. For example, in California, even though they had a large volume of coronavirus numbers, this state tax revenue decrease did not happen. And so they were able to fund their state universities at the levels that they were previously doing it. But in the beginning, so in the fall, so of August of last year, it was really hard to really understand that. Another two things that happened in academics is philanthropy and endowments. So the private institutions, the Yale, the Harvards, et cetera, they work a lot on philanthropy and endowments. And so in the very beginning of the pandemic, philanthropy took a hit because of job insecurity, and because of the economy, endowments took a hit because stock market changes. And so that made a lot of the private institutions decrease their hiring because of uncertainty in the different financial markets. And then because international students had a hard time coming in and they are full paying tuition dollars, it was really difficult for academics to really know what their budget, all of this just made it where academics didn't know where their budgets were going to happen. So what ended happening is there was a lot of hiring freezes and a lot of hiring pauses. Originally, so back in fall, if you were to ask me back in August what had happened, what we saw was a 70% decrease in the number of faculty ads from 2019. So year to year, it was a 70% decrease as of like a snapshot of August last year. Over the past year, so since August, things have thawed. I'm not going to say they're perfect yet, but things have thawed. And so now it looks like between 2019 and the 2020 hiring cycle, about a 22 to 40% decrease, depending on which numbers you're looking at. So we are seeing an increase of opportunities in academics that we didn't see come August. We're not 100% sure exactly what's happening to positions such as administration, support positions. So this would be like running a core facility, staff scientists, grants administration, technology transfer, all those other academic support positions. And it would really depend on where the money was coming from. If the money was grant funded and not touched, so things such as new postdoc positions, staff scientist positions, perhaps core facilities that are grant funded, those probably didn't decrease at all because the money stream was secure. If it was coming from a university support or state support, that's where you may have seen an additional change or decrease because of that, because of the slide we just went through. So that's kind of what happened in academics. Now, the AAMC, which is the American Association of Medical Colleges, so all the med schools across the nation that do faculty hiring belong to this amazing group called the AAMC. They asked all their member organizations, both back in August of 2020 and in April of 2021, to give them some information about what's happening around faculty recruitment. And AAMC was kind enough to share this data to us. So let's walk through this because it's a little bit busier than some of our data that we've been looking at. So this first one is back in August, how many positions that were under recruitment, so actively going, how many were lost? And it looked like about 28% of the positions were lost back in August of 2020. Now, over here in April of 2021, that number has decreased to 14%. So this suggests to me that active recruitment have started to go again, but it's not back to perfection. Now, the second question they asked their member organizations was on any positions under active recruitment that were continuing. So they kept going. This is encouraging. So if someone back in August, if a faculty position was open, 60% of those stayed open, which is good to hear. And that's still true today. So they're still actively recruiting. Now, the next one was if it was under active recruitment, was it suspended until things got better? So 30% of people say they suspended their certs, 60% said they were perfectly fine. That number has started to decrease over here. So we're seeing now that suspended recruitments are only 16%. 24% were suspended indefinitely. That has decreased to 15%. That 49% were still being actively considered. So new positions were being considered and the dean was saying yes. That has actually started to increase. So the dean is saying yes more and more and more and more. And we're seeing a decrease of new recruitment searches suspended until return to 26%, now to 12%. So that suggests that many of them are starting to do their faculty recruitments even in this virtual environment. So they're going anyways. They've lifted, let's just say that again, thawed their searches. And they have decreased the amount of new searches that have been suspended indefinitely. So 23% were written initially, now we're down to less than 10% that are suspended indefinitely. All this data shows us that the academic job market is starting to get better. One of the things that we've noticed is that there has been an active spring 2021 cycle, something that we have never seen in the past. So basically what's happened is those academic positions that were supposed to be in fall 2020 moved through the spring. It's not a full hiring cycle. I would not say we're back up to 100% of what we should have been expecting from fall of 2020, but it's definitely better than if you would have asked me back in August. The thing with this is, though, is that the timeline has shifted. The timeline shifted tremendously, right? Things have gotten shorter, right? So you may apply, normally an academic cycle is you apply in August, it's due in November, they'll start doing interviews in maybe December and January, secondary interviews in March and April. That has all shifted. It's either condensed or just fully shifted, depending on the university. So some universities, now it was due in February and they plan to make decisions in June. Some of them, they were due in February and they're going to make decisions in August, right? And just bring you on in this thing in January instead of the fall. One of the things I've definitely heard from a lot of trainees, though, is that you are getting unhelpful advice based on past job markets. So one of my favorite trainees that I'm working with, someone said to them, well, if you haven't gotten an interview by now, and this was back in February, you're not getting an interview. That cannot be true as these timelines have shifted. But if our faculty members who have only ever been in a normal faculty cycle told you that, that is true-ish in a normal cycle. But this year, everything has shifted. So if people are giving you advice based on a normal timeline, it may be unhelpful and it may stress you out even more when we look at it. And you should think about it as everything has just shifted. We are desperately hoping for a very vigorous fall cycle of hiring. We don't know what that 100% is going to look at, but everything is leading towards a more positive cycle this coming fall. So I'm hoping that I'm giving you some hope that academics are going to get there. So the good news, The jobs are still out there and you will have success. I absolutely believe that you will have success. In 2008, we had a huge economic downturn. What we definitely saw from that over the years is an increase of jobs since then. Um, so we predict that it's still going to be like that. Um, the other thing is that unemployment for scientists remains very, very low. Science gives us a better chance. And in fact, in the coronavirus and the pandemics, we're the ones who saved the day, right? Let's be honest, right? Go science. We're the ones who made it so that we could, legit. Those of you who work on vaccines and coronavirus, who thought we would have vaccines in a year? Who thought? So science is saving the day. And so investments into science is happening at a much more vigorous pace than we've ever seen in the past. So what I'm going to try to say to this is focus on what you can control and not what you can't control. And for those of you who have been coming to OITE resilience thing, this should be a very familiar slide. We cannot control the pandemic. We wish we could, right? But we can't control it, and we can't necessarily control how the pandemic influences the job market. We need to focus more on what we can control, stuff like our optimism around the job search, our preparation, the experiences to be competitive, networking, and taking care of ourselves. So let's move into the next section of the talk where I've told you the data. Now, how do you actually become that competitive candidate that you really want to be? The first is really thinking about this in a more optimistic way. Some of us have much more optimistic tendencies than others of us. There's a full video on this, and I want to thank Denise Saunders in our office for talking about this in a more strong way. Folks who believe in optimism are, sorry about the train behind me. Sorry, I'm gonna let it go by. I don't know if you guys can hear it like I can. Folks who believe in optimism have that confidence, that satisfaction, and that resilience and hope that 2020, that was an isolated event, and I'm gonna be awesome moving forward. Folks who are more pessimistic get more frustrated, more anger, more despair, and it's just 2020 is just going to leak over into 2021 and 2022 and 2023, et cetera. Both optimism and pessimism make us who we are, but creating a more optimistic way of thinking definitely can help you feel like you have more control over the situation. So an optimistic approach to job hunting and job philosophies is that we find value in what's happened, giving you a chance to become better. That setback from last year gives us a chance to learn something new. Like maybe you couldn't go into your research group as much as you wanted to, so you learned statistics and you've never done that before. The flexibility of the being flexible and the choosing to do new things really help us to build that optimistic approach. So I'm not going to say becoming the most optimistic person in the entire universe is an easy thing, right? All of us probably struggle a little bit with optimism and resilience and negative thinking. So challenging negative thinking. My personal one that I struggle with more is like that catastrophic thinking. Like if something went wrong, then it just cascades and I'm never going to get out of it. So I've worked on journaling to kind of challenge that negative thinking and to become a more optimistic person. I need to make sure I take care of myself, both physical, emotional, and mental well-being. So thinking about all those resilience things that we talk about, and I have lots more resources about that at the end. Maybe practicing mindfulness and meditation. There's some amazing positive psychology exercises that have been written about in the literature. You can go Google these later, and then the longer talk, which was linked in the video, which we'll share with you later, is thinking about a gratitude visit and a gratitude letter. What 3 things in life? I definitely worked on this during the pandemic, is every day thinking about 3 good things that happened and thinking about signature strengths. And also rewarding yourself when things go well and things, move forward. We can control our thought processes around how the pandemic has influenced hiring. And this will help us to move on to the next step. Now, the next thing you can control is your preparation. And so part of it is really knowing what you want. So making sure that your career exploration is up to snuff and up to speed. And so many of you who have spent so much time with me over the past week at the Career Symposium know how valuable it is to start working on thinking about what you're going to do next and what are the steps you're going to take to get there. The link here goes to past Career Symposium items. If you couldn't make it this year, you can come and go look at training.nih.gov/NIH_career_symposium. So they have an amazing wealth of past events that you can look at. Additionally, for those of you who maybe aren't at the NIH and those of you who are, making sure that you're going to things such as career panels at your national meetings, if they have opportunities to meet and greet with speakers or small things, small virtual meetings, things like that. Anything you can do to help build your career exploration, regardless of what you're going to do next. Even if you know you want to be a PI next, there's still a lot of things you can do for your career exploration, talking to professionals, making sure you know exactly how to launch and be awesome once you get to that position. We're going to talk a little bit more in the next couple slides about making sure that your skill sets are ready and awesome to go. So maybe you need some additional training, some experiences, and some committee work. I often say committee work is good for all of us. You don't have to join the most rigorous committee out there, but joining committees gives you a chance to build leadership skills and do something besides your research every day. Again, even if you want to be a faculty member, joining a small committee is a really great idea because as a faculty member, you will be on a ton of committees. And so learning how to balance your work and committee work now is a skill that will go and be valuable for you as you move through. Many of the speakers said this in various different ways, but you will be hired on more than technical skills. And so making sure that those skills, that those transferable skills are ready to go and you have stories to tell around them, it's going to be very valuable. Then we're going to talk a little bit about planning, making sure your documents are ready to go. And if you are an intramural trainee, so an NIH intramural trainee, we really do encourage you to see your career counselor at any point. And I put the link there on how to make appointments. Again, this is only for intramural people. If you are extramural, you're at a university, you should look at your career centers or talk to your postdoc office or talk to your grad advisors about how you can get career counseling as well. Career counselors are phenomenal to help you make career decisions, to help you create that long-term plan so that you're on track and ready to go. A lot of trainees come at the beginning to set themselves up ready to go. Some of trainees come at the end to get document reviews and to practice mock interviews. You can come at any time though, and really make sure that you're on track and prepared for the next step in your career. This comes from a report in 2011 from Monster, but I do have to say that this list of 14 things, the skills employers want, this is true regardless of what you're going to do next. If you're academics, nonprofit, government, industry, these are the skills that folks are really looking for in new employees. So things such as teamwork, problem solving, communication, leadership, adaptability. All of these types of skills are what they're asking for of new employees. And I'm hoping that you see on this list of 14 things that Monster came up with for the biotech, so for our field, one thing you don't see is technical skills. Employers anticipate that you can do your technical skills. That doesn't mean you don't necessarily have to put them on your resume, right? But they know that you can do your Western blots and you can do your cryo-EM and all the rest of that stuff. What sets you apart from other candidates and makes you a competitive and qualified applicant is being able to prove to employers that you can do these 14 things. So how would you show initiative, right? So a good way for that, I was talking about this recently, a way to show initiative is thinking about when I was a postdoc and I joined my lab that I did my postdoc in, I was like, it blew my mind that the chemical cabinet, no one had ever organized it. It was not in any, so we just kept ordering new things because no one knew where anything was. Furthermore, when I went into the flammable cabinet, underneath the hood, the flammable cabinet, and I opened it up, they had mixed all the acids and the bases. And for me, this was like this no, no, just no. So I took the initiative to organize the chemical cabinet, create a database of the things that we actually had so that people could know if we're low, we're ready to go, and then create an ordering system. So I took that initiative. So that was a story that I could tell when I came into an interview. All of you have stories around every single one of these 14 things. And so my challenge to you is to look at these 14 things and start building your stories that you can tell in interviews, or maybe even things that you want to put into your resume or cover letter, because these are the things that employers are looking for as you move forward. Now, one of the things that came from our survey of our speakers that I want to add to this list for 2020 going forward is autonomy. Be able to work from home, be motivated, and keep getting your work done. So that one, I think it's also self-motivation, number 4, but I wanted to add in autonomy because I do think that it has a lot of really interesting components to it about how we have learned to work over the past year. Now, the next thing that I really wanted to talk about is making sure you're prepared, right? So we're going to prepare ourselves by making sure the other thing, sorry, I'm going to go back to this one. If you're looking at this list and there's something on this list that you're like, you know what, I need more experience. Maybe you need more teamwork. So maybe you need to build a collaboration so you have that teamwork, or join that committee so you can have teamwork. If there's something on this list that you say, I'm not sure how I would prove it, this is your time to go and find some way to prove it. You can ask a trusted advisor, you can ask your friends, you can ask a career advisor about how do you get experience maybe in communication or maybe in leadership, finding ways to make sure you can fill all 14 of these different skills that employers are looking for. Okay, sorry. Back to preparing your documents. This is definitely something that you can do as well. I read a lot of CVs and resumes in my job. And one of the things that I find happens a lot is that you tell me everything, hoping that me as an employer will just read through and figure out what I need out of that. And so it ends up being this laundry list that is really for the employer, they don't have time to read that. So 2 speakers, I'm going to give you 2 quotes from 2 speakers from our survey results said, communicate your value and make sure that you show you're a really good fit with the job description. Okay. So making your resume and your cover letter or your CV, depending on which one you need. CVs are for academic positions, resumes are just about for everything else. I've listed here, and again, you'll get the slides later, a YouTube video on how to build your resume, your CV, and your cover letter, and also our resume and CV guide, as well as our cover letter guide. I've listed both of those there for you to go look at later. What I often like to say to trainees when they're building these documents and thinking about them, again, make it easy for the hiring manager to say, this is the person I want. Look at the job ad, think about what are the top 5 things they're asking for, and then how would you prove that on your various documents? It's really important to basically, I like to say, hit them over the head with making sure that they know that you are the candidate that they want. For the interview, you should definitely practice different interview questions. You can Google an amazing amount of typical interview questions and typical interview, practicing your interview talks. So you should practice those. You can do that with a trusted friend, a colleague, there's a lot of also, there's some online things you can use to practice different typical questions, practicing your talk. We also have a video here on YouTube at the OITE YouTube page on how to do an interview. From our speakers, they told, should be in quotes, because many of the speakers said that you should be preparing better for Zoom interviews, making sure you have proper lighting and proper backgrounds. I'm not notorious for that. You can probably just saw somebody go behind me, right? But making sure that you have your Zoom interview, you're ready to go. The other thing is to make sure you're practicing with friends. practice ahead of time, make sure all your connections are good, just, have that ready to go. The last thing you can control as you're thinking about moving to the next step and being a qualified and competitive candidate. And if you look back through the chat here, many of the things that you said you took away from the career symposium was that how important networking was. I'd like to challenge you to think about networking not so much as this scary thing that you'd rather crawl under the table than do, but think about it more as a data collection project. So in the chat, I want you to really quickly put in, if you think about networking as a data collection project, what types of information are you looking for from an informational interview in order to make informed choices on if that career is for you? I'll give you a second. Now, as you're typing and as you're thinking about that, I do want to put out that a lot of people do use Excel for this type of thing. So this is a funny story. A couple of years ago, we had a science policy panel. There's this phenomenal speaker who had moved into science policy, who had talked about her informational interviewing and the Excel document that she had that to keep track of who she talked to and what they said. It was a glorious Excel document. This is data. It was data collection project that she was doing. Now, at the end of the talk, she said this crazy thing. Somebody asked her, okay, great. Knowing all this, how did you get your job? And she said, I got lucky. I call baloney. She didn't get lucky. She worked her bum off doing a research project, making sure she was prepared and ready to go into that field. So this gives you that control. So I'm seeing the chat function, what skills are, what responsibilities, how good are you? What are the day-to-day activities? What are the schedule and the work-life balance? That's a great one. You can ask all those questions about, what are your values around your work life? And then how does that go into the position? I want to also, we talk about this as a data collection project. You guys are amazing at data collection. You've been doing that for some of us, 10, 15 years. You know how to do data collection. So if you think about it like that, it might not be as scary as just go off and talk to someone. I also want to put it out, it's very similar to a seed crystal. You remember organic chemistry? We had a seed crystal. You just put a little bit in so that everything could grow upon it. I think that a lot of us look at networking like the milieu that this crystal is supposed to grow in. And we're looking at this test tube and it just looks clear and it looks overwhelming. And why isn't my crystal going? But if we put in one little seed crystal, that crystal grows and gets bigger and bigger. Now, if we look about that, we put in one contact. That one contact, we talk to them. That's our seed crystal. And now our crystal in our test tube continues to grow. Your networking is just like that. There's a great video on networking here, so you can look at that later. But one thing about networking that's really important, and many people put into the chat function earlier as we were getting going, is how important informational interviewing is. So informational interviewing, there actually is a protocol, okay? So I've talked to you about data collection. I've talked to you about seed crystals, okay? Now we're gonna talk about protocols. Here's the protocol for informational interviewing. You're looking for 4 things. And some of you put definitely many of these things into the chat where you can slide them into these 4 sections of our experimental protocol. The first is present. Tell me about your current position. What do you love? What do you hate? To asking the question, what is your day-to-day like, is not very informative because the speaker will always, or your connection will always say, there's no such thing as a typical day. Better ways to ask the same type of question is tell me what's on your to-do list, both your long-term to-do list and your short-term to-do list. Excuse me. The other thing you can ask is how much of your day is spent in meetings, writing, asking for a percentage. What percentage of your day is in meetings? What percentage of your day is in writing? And what percentage of your day is doing emails, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So asking about the job and what the job looks like and things like that. The next segment of this is past. So that's how did you get into this field? Okay, so what did you do to get into this field? What made you a competitive candidate? Did you take any trainings that made you competitive? I think a really other interesting question to ask in this particular section, everyone tells you how important networking is. Who did you network with in order to be successful in being hired in this field? And that way you can see how networking worked for somebody else. Future, you should ask, what are the long-term opportunities? So how do you see your own personal career growing? How do you see the organization growing, the competition growing, the field growing, right? So if somebody would ask me, for example, a couple of years ago about what's going to be hot in industry, I would have definitely said, immunotherapy, right? So maybe it's something new now. Now I think it's going to be viruses and, vaccine technology, but that's just Lori's prediction. But that's what also you're looking from all the different speakers that are out there. And then the last part of this is you should ask for advice. The biggest question should be, who else should you talk to, right? Remember, that's that seed crystal that you're going to grow upon it and upon it. You can ask them for feedback. Could you look at my resume and give me any feedback? Are there anything I should do to become a competitive candidate, right? Should I join a professional society? Should I take additional coursework? What would make me competitive? Do you have insights into any possible positions? I think another one here is that many of you want to know is, what's a typical starting salary for this type of place? What does work-life balance look like for you? Those kind of questions. We have a whole talk as well on informational interviewing. So this is like the highlights, but if you want to dive in deeper, please go watch that later. So my challenge for you is to, especially if you attended the Career Symposium this week, one interesting thing we have heard from Career Symposium speakers in the past is that almost no trainees follow up. So a couple of years ago, we had this scientist who actually came out of Sharon's lab. He was a grad student or a postdoc in Sharon's lab, and he went to go work for Coca-Cola. So a totally different type of job, but still working in the science side of Coke. He emailed us after the Career Symposium and said to us, not a single trainee reached out to me. Not a single one. You gave them my email address and not a single one reached out. Can you imagine if you were that one trainee that maybe did, how that conversation could have gone? So maybe it is a speaker this week. You should email them a quick thank you note, maybe something that they said that really, really influenced you. If you would like to talk to them again, ask for another meeting by Zoom. You're asking for about 15 to 30 minutes of their time, not much more of that, and on their schedule. So whenever they have the time. If you really want to meet with this person and you don't get a response immediately, don't think they don't love you. Okay. My email box, I can just imagine with the Zoom thing that just happened, how horrible my email box is going to be when I get back to it. So if you don't get a response, feel free to contact them about 1 to 2 weeks later and say, I hope this didn't get lost in your email box. I'd still really love to chat with you. It is fine to do that. Most of us will freak out and apologize, but it's perfectly fine for you to do that. So that's your networking challenge as you move through and prepare for this next step of your career. Now, the last thing you can control. So we talked about your optimism. We've talked about planning and preparation. We talked about networking a little bit. And the last thing is making sure you're taking care of yourself during this entire time. It's stressful. It's stressful. Trying to think about the next step. I can talk from my own personal experiences, and I know from talking to you that it's stressful as you as well. So here's a couple of things that I wanted to point out. This is linked to our YouTube playlist on the Becoming a Resilient Scientist series, things such as how do you become assertive, how do you ask for what you want, how do you deal with cognitive distortions, etc. Really, really great series that I do highly recommend you go check out. We also have a monthly mental health webinar that kind of talks about the different challenges. April's was on executive functioning, and it was like basically how to be better with executive functioning. This month's, which was just this past Monday, which many of you went to, was an amazing talk on the psychology of career decision making. We're still working on getting that one up online. It should be there by Monday. But if you missed that psychology of career decision making, please go watch it. It really is a phenomenal on why it's so hard to make career decisions. And also, if you are an intramural trainee, make sure you're looking out for our wellness groups, our support groups, the meditation groups, the Thriving Thursday, individual wellness coaching, And building community. I think that's one thing that, especially during the pandemic, has come out, is that how isolated many of us have gotten. So finding communities, whether that's through your postdoc association, your grad association, SACNAS, the Native Network of African American Fellows, scientists who are parents at the NIH, we call it Mom, Dad, Docs. Finding community so that you don't feel so alone in this process. And there's a lot more information about that on our website at the wellness section. As we kind of think about this and wrap up for the day and move into questions, I think the thing that came from all the speakers, and definitely the things I've heard over the past couple of weeks, don't be discouraged. Don't be discouraged. Keep trying, keep going out there. But I want to add in there, find the support when you need it so you don't have to do this alone. So I have a challenge and homework for you because, you know, that if some of you know me, this is how you work. First thing, in the next 3 months, pick one thing to increase your optimism. So go back, maybe it's journaling, maybe it's that gratitude letter, maybe it's 3 good things. Pick one thing to increase your optimism in the next 3 months. In the next 6 months, what are you going to do to increase a skill set? Are you going to join a committee? Are you going to take a class? Are you going to step up and do something in your research group because it's driving you nuts and you think you can make a difference? Do one thing over the next 6 months to increase a skill that you can prove to an employer. And in the next 2 months, maybe think about working on document preparation. You know, start getting your resume, your CV, your cover letter, whatever it is, start thinking about that document. And then in the next 1 month, do my network challenge. Talk to one person, get that seed crystal going, get it going so that you can build upon it in that test tube. As we kind of wrap up and go through lots of other things, and I'll start looking at your Q&A now as we go through. Please look at our page, our YouTube page. Our careers blog is phenomenal. If you're a past trainee or you're a trainee here, you can search our alumni database. You can follow us on Twitter. We really want to make sure that you are prepared and thinking about this. As we give you the slides and the recording afterwards, there's a couple of more slides at the very end on resources and references that we used throughout the talk. I really thank you for coming. This talk was a lot of fun to put together. It's something, you know, that we haven't necessarily done in the past. And I'm going to open up the Q&A and kind of see what's here. So remember, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A, not the chat. It flies by too fast. So let's see what we have. Okay, do we have any data on the predicted and or ongoing hiring for international? Basically is what's happening with international postdocs. We don't know. We don't know if we're going to sponsor more H-1B visas. We don't know. Right now, the H-1B visa pool is very limited. International postdocs are really, really in a tricky spot, and we totally understand that. I don't have an answer that's going to be positive or negative for international postdocs, any different from any other year. I would say if you are an international postdoc, start looking early, start building your network really, really early. Your network becomes much more important as an international trainee than even if you are an American or a green card holder. International postdoc networking is so very, very important. And if you're really interested, making sure you're talking to a career advisor, career counselor, et cetera, to make sure your plan is going off. I don't know, somebody asked about the medical devices. I don't know enough information about that, but there's a lot of resources at the back in the next couple of slides that you might be able to find that later. Oh, Christine, she put in her name. So she's asked, are any of these shifts due to increases in retirement? You know, I don't know that. That's a really interesting question. I don't think the data is out there enough. I doubt it, but I think it's more just the shifts into the spring are because of the decreases in the fall. I don't think we're seeing that full decrease from retirement yet. Oh, good question. How should we include examples of skills employers want in our cover letters? And how do we prioritize which things to include? That's a great question. And you really should look at it from what's in the job ad. You should look at the job ad and highlight what is there, looking for things that aren't just technical skills in the job ad. A lot of us look at the technical skills and then that's all we talk about. So look at the job ad with a little bit more of a critical eye and look for those team skills, et cetera, and what are they asking for? And then whichever ones they're asking for in the job ad, that's the ones that I would then put in my cover letter. Okay, we talked about this next one. So someone has asked a really interesting question. Do you think it's acceptable to send a LinkedIn message instead of an email? Now, as someone who, I love LinkedIn with all my heart, right? And you're all gonna go now connect with me on LinkedIn. The amount of time and energy I spend looking at LinkedIn stuff and the emails that come with LinkedIn is about yay big. Other people may have somebody totally different. So if you send them a LinkedIn message and you don't get a response, then I would definitely try by an email because they likely didn't see it fly by. Okay. Someone's asked a lot of questions that I don't know. So Guru, I don't know the answer to your question about how long people are staying, et cetera. That's not amount of data that I have. Great. Postdoc hiring at NIH has been phenomenal the entire time. New postdocs have been coming on the entire time. So I haven't seen postdoc be totally decreased. Somebody's asked do you think they're going to increase the tenure clock for assistant professors? That's a really phenomenal question. And that would be something that I would ask on an informational interview because I don't fully know the answer to that. Okay. Good question. When should I actually actively look for a job? So, I'm going to apply for a position. My contract ends in XYZ. When should I start looking? So the general rule of thumb is about, general rule of thumb is about 1 month for every $10,000 you're going to make. So most of us who have PhDs should anticipate making between $90,000 to $120,000 plus or minus, right? Plus or minus. So it's going to take about 9 to 12 months. So I would really start looking for a job. So if you think about it as a year, so the year before you need to go off, the first 3 to 6 months is more networking. You should focus on your networking and really, 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 really network that first 6 months. Then starting at about 8 months out at the most, probably that's when I would really start looking for and applying to jobs. But if you're networking, you're going to have people from the inside, especially for industry, people on the inside putting your resume in the right piles. And don't feel guilty asking industry people to help you with that, because if you get hired, they likely get a bounce back bonus for you getting hired. And so it's money in their pockets. So it happens a lot in industry. So don't feel guilty asking your industry contacts to help move your resume along. Somebody's asked, do people post job openings? Did you know OIT has a job board? It's the most active job board I've seen. Also has one of the most interesting collections of different types of jobs. If you go to the OITE webpage, so training.nih.gov, under career services, there's one that says jobs, and any alumni who sends us a job posting, that's where we post it. Okay, I'm going to have time for 2 more questions. Let me see if there's anything here. So I think I talked a little bit about postdoc positions, because postdoc positions, about forecasting how hiring is going to happen. Postdoc positions are much more grant focused, and grant money wasn't necessarily hit by the pandemic. A lot of postdoc positions were also not affected. I think a lot of times it was more, it wasn't the money, it was people didn't want to bring people in virtually. And so you will definitely see an increase of that as people go back to more in-person hiring. Okay, one more. All right. So in this last one, if I have 15 or more speakers from the Career Symposium that I loved, and I want to do informational interviews, should I do them all or spread them out? Man, spread them out. Spread them out over the next couple of months. Give them a chance. Give them a chance to so that you're not overwhelmed with people all at once. Furthermore, if you emailed someone in 6 months and said, "Hi, I heard you at the NIH Career Symposium back in May. I'd really like to talk to you as I'm moving forward in my career," that is totally fine. Absolutely fine. In fact, I would actually really recommend that. Let everything kind of settle down. You can do it anytime and say, "Hope you remember me." I've used that line so many times in networking, and no one has ever come back saying, "Who the heck is she?" They probably are saying that, but they don't say that to my face. So perfectly fine for you to do that. And again, remember, if you email them and you haven't heard back, you have the right to email them 1 to 2 weeks later and say, "I hope this didn't get lost in your email box," right? All the way. Look at the videos on networking and informational interviewing for lots more information and resources there. I am so glad that many of you figured out our horrible Zoom this morning and got in here and were able to ask questions and kind of think about post-pandemic hiring. I really enjoyed giving this talk and looking at the data and thinking about how to help you be a competitive candidates. I wish you all the most amazing luck with all of your career needs and thinking about the next step in your careers. The OITE is here for you, whether you are an intramural trainee, whether you're not an intramural trainee. There's an amazing amount of resources, and we welcome you to so many events that we host. Enjoy the rest of your Friday, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I hope to see you all soon at an OITE event. And with that, we're going to end our day here. I wish you the best, and we're going to end the webinar.